Well, good morning. I'm Dean Willis. I'm the Wastewater Treatment Senior Engineer for the Groundwater Protection Individual Unit. I put this together with Karthik Kumarasamy, who's our Senior Engineer for our general permits, which deals mostly with our septic tanks and alternative on-sites. Wastewater is often an overlooked part in the RV and mobile home parks since you don't see it. If not operated correctly, they can be an overwhelming part as well. Facilities should start by having two plans in place, recommendations, contingency plan, which gives you an emergency operation plan, people that you should call, vendors that can act quickly if you have equipment, or can act quickly if you have a sewage spill. And then the operation and maintenance plan, which tells a person how the system is ran, notification procedures, planned inspection and maintenance duties, and O&M manuals for all equipment. These two items are required when you come in for an individual permit if you are a larger wastewater treatment plant. It's important to notify residents. Annual reminders should be sent out to residents, for instance, for not flushing grease down the drain, preventing non-flushable wipes, and clean wipes. There are many links that you can find online to help you find these, to find some notifications that you can send out to people. There's a link on this presentation. And this is from Maine Water Environmental Association. Should also be warn users not to use odor inhibitors that will negatively affect the process. For instance, it's a lot of RV holding tanks. People want to mask the odors, prevent major clogs, save money, and clean the system. But there are some items in these chemical cleaners and odor inhibitors that can damage the system. For instance, formaldehyde or paraformaldehyde is a biocide which can kill the microorganisms that are treating the wastewater. Also, if you have a ZIPDs permit or another discharge, you got to be concerned about zinc or copper being in some of these chemical cleaners or pesticides. Use odor chemicals sparingly that are enzyme or bacteria based, and do not use large amounts of bleach and other disinfectants that can also affect the system. There's 3 different ways that mobile home parks can discharge wastewater. There can just be a collection system that takes the wastewater from the mobile home or RV park and sends it to a larger plant with a manhole piping system. Some systems have force mains and can send the wastewater to a larger treatment plant, a publicly owned wastewater treatment plant. And some systems will have on-site wastewater treatment, such as septic tanks, alternative on-site treatment plants, and small package plants. Typical sewage, if you look on the graph on the top left, you'll see this is typical flow for a gravity sewage line. And it kind of comes in throughout the day. You have your peaks where everybody is waking up, and then you have a peak, during lunch, and then you have another peak when people are making dinner. Force mains are a little different. Force mains wait until a level inside the lift station gets high enough to start pumping wastewater. Understand the settings of your pump station to prevent overfeeding the wastewater treatment plant, and allows you also, besides overfeeding the wastewater treatment plant, you want to worry about wastewater sitting there too long and becoming septic and odorous. Seasonal adjustments may be necessary if you have high flow people during the winter months and low flow during the summer months. You might have to adjust those settings so you don't have wastewater sitting inside that lift station. The treatment process can be very complicated for a large system. So this kind of example, you have residential sewage that comes in. You have pre-treatment for commercial and industrial facilities before they can even discharge to a collection system. Then you have preliminary treatment, which removes carbon, primary treatment, which removes all the garbage that gets flushed down the toilet, and secondary treatment, where microorganisms are actually doing the work in the biological process. Then from there, solids can be sent to a landfill, or effluent is disinfected and reused. With the septic tank, it's a little bit different. The septic tank works as the primary treatment and the solids handling, because there are some solids inside the septic tank that are actually being digested by the microorganisms in there. The leach field, however, works as that secondary treatment, where it's treating the nitrogen, and the microorganisms are sitting there eating the organic matter and turning it into inorganic matter. Here's a picture of a septic tank. Now you can see the wastewater comes in, and it has a baffle. The baffle comes in typically around 12 inches below the level, so that it stops that energy of the flow coming into a septic tank. The sludge sits on the bottom, and this is where I said, those microorganisms are kind of eating and digesting themselves. So the sludge is actually getting smaller. All the fats, oils, and greases, known as scum, will float up to the top, and then there's a baffle in the middle that prevents that fat, oils, and greases from floating into the next section of the tank. And I'm trying to move something on. And then you typically have an effluent filter that protects any of those solids from getting out and damaging your leach field. Show you an example of that. So here's an example of a screen that is installed inside a discharge baffle, and this screen helps prevent those solids from going out and damaging your leach field. You want to protect that leach field as much as possible, because that is where the treatment is happening, and that prevents, once the leach field is damaged, you'll have wastewater backing up into the septic tank. Make sure people aren't parking on top of your septic tank, and make sure they aren't parking on top of your disposal field, or they can damage it. Mobile home and RV park owners need to ensure systems are not overloaded. This is from R18-9 A314, and it is the criteria for how much can be connected to a septic tank. And what we do is we count fixtures. So if you have a sink, that's one fixture, kitchen sink, one fixture, bathroom sink, one fixture, toilet, one fixture. And so counting those number of fixtures, you can figure out how many RVs or mobile home park can be on a system. Keep in mind that these numbers can be a little more, because RV wastewater is more high strength than typical wastewater. A good rule of thumb would be no more than 2 RVs per 1,000 gallon septic tank, 3 RVs per 1,500, and 4 RVs for an 1,800 gallon tank. Or you can go 2 times the flow plus 1,500 for tanks 2,000 gallons or larger. Mobile homes could be larger and should be calculated individually, because they can be larger than RVs themselves. Mother Nature does most of the work in the septic tank. Tanks should routinely be emptied though. Checks should be done annually with a sludge judge. At a minimum, tanks should be emptied once every 5 years, and empty high usage tanks prior to high traffic season. Here's an example of a sludge judge. It's a tube that you stick down the water, and it takes a sample. You can see this gentleman here. He has, you can see the brown on the bottom of the stick and the brown on the top. So the brown on the bottom is your sludge, and the brown on the top of the stick that he sampled is your scum. The standard rule of measure is that you're due for a pumping when the solids, the scum plus the sludge, accumulates to about 30 to 50% of the total volume of your tank. These sludge judges, there's many places that sell them online, but you can find them on Amazon if you don't have one, to check your system. Microbiology works slower in the winter, so you got to protect that microbiology. Make sure there's no over disinfection that can kill the biology, because then solids can start leaving your tank, and the solids will accumulate in your tank faster. plus they're not treating the way they need to. And evaporation or transpiration works slowest during the winter months. I mentioned these two items because it's during the winter months that we in Arizona tend to have a lot of people visiting our system. So when at the times where we're able to get rid of the effluent the slowest, we have the most amount of visitors in Arizona. So it's more of a reason why you want to make sure those septic tanks are maintenance before they show up. Too much flow can damage the leach fields. Water meters can notify the user of too much flow. So if you're an RV park system and you have individual meters for each person using the site, you can watch those meters to make sure they're not using too much. If you have a lot of water missing, it's possible that that water is going to your sewer system. So we want to watch out for trickling of water too. So here's two examples of things that people find online in order to prevent freezing in the winter. I like the one on the left because it shows a tap outside or a tap that doesn't go to a drain. You want to make sure that people aren't trickling water to prevent their freezing lines in their RV by running the water into their drains. Here's an example of what can happen. Most of a lot of the complaints we've seen damaged leach fields is from going out to the system, and the people are all leaving their water trickling overnight, and it's overwhelming the septic system, and it's pushing those solids out of the septic tank and into the leach field and damaging the leach field. So you can also put together a flyer that lets people know inside the RV park, hey, don't run your water. If you do run your water, please run it outside and put it on the ground so you don't damage our wastewater, our septic tank or wastewater system. The following was a list found online of other things people can do to prevent, and this can also be put in a flyer, to prevent their pipes from freezing. Open cabinet doors in the RV to circulate heat, put insulation around pipes, insulate the holding tanks, use heat tape on RV pipes, skirt your RV. Here's an example of what skirting looks like. I know that can be cumbersome for many people that are on the road and just visiting. Close gray valve and onboard freshwater and wastewater tanks so that you use those tanks, and those tanks aren't the pipes from the tanks to the connection aren't getting frozen in the middle of the night, and insulate RV bays or find a warmer location. Maintain your site, prevent infrastructure from being hidden. Dirt, gravel, or asphalt can hide important infrastructure. So you want to make sure that when you want to respond to something in your system, you can. For instance, manholes, cleanouts, make sure they're not covered. Vegetation can hide dangerous, can hide animals dangerous to infrastructure and humans. The root intrusion from vegetations can grow into wastewater systems. They can damage septic tanks. Those roots are always trying to find that moisture, and they can clog screens and other equipment. They can also be a fire hazard. ADQ does require that you maintain a site and you do remove that vegetation so there isn't damage to the system. Air release valves, pump vents, and tank vents should have screens to prevent bugs from getting into them. So if you have any blowers or you have any pumps, make sure that the intakes for those have a screen, and you can buy some on Amazon. Here's a little example of one that you can buy on Amazon, but realistically, you can just get some window screen with a hose clamp in order to put it around any vents that you might have. Above ground PVC, make sure that above ground PVC is metal and below ground is actual PVC, so it's not corroding. Paint any PVC that you do have above grade, paint it to prevent UV degradation. I go out to a lot of systems and they have the white pipes running everywhere and they are all yellow and you just barely tap them and they break. If you paint them, it'll make it last a lot longer. And then wrap any pipes that you might have on your system. look around your system for holes that you might find. This is an alternative on-site that we visited that had a hole that went directly into the tank. So every time it rained, it was putting dirt and other stuff inside the tank, and that's just taking up your capacity. The bottom right picture is a hole into a tank that will look like a gopher hole. And so the system user who had bought it from somebody else never thought about looking inside that hole because it just looked like there was, a rodent somewhere around the system. You could actually put your hand inside the tank. So look around your system for any holes that you might have and try to block them so you don't have sediment and rain and other stuff going into your system and affecting it. Record color and foam changes. Recording color and foam changes of your wastewater is a great simple way to monitor wastewater treatment systems. While you cannot use color and foam alone, you need to do the standard battery of tests, including, DO, sour rates, microscopic exams. Checking your mixed liquor suspended solids is one of the simple ways. So this is an example of a settleometer that can be purchased online. Now the color of this settleometer, it's kind of dark. If you have an aerated alternative system, it should be a little bit lighter than this. And here's an example of one. You don't need to go out and buy a settleometer. You can make your own settleometer. Just put some lines on a jar, 0 to 1,000. After 30 minutes, you should be seeing a settling between 30 and 40 percent settling inside your wastewater system. So if you have an alternative on-site, this isn't for the septic users. If you have an alternative on-site, make sure you're checking that mixed liquor suspended solids and kind of record the color. You want it to be a light brown. If you're getting too dark, you have too many solids in the system that need to be removed. Equipment, make sure blowers are working, intakes are clear, pumps are not clogged. If possible, test flow of each pump, and then make sure you have alarms. Whether you have a pump station that's pumping to your wastewater treatment plant or a pump station that's pumping to a larger publicly owned treatment system, you want to make sure that lift station has an audible alarm, and you want to make sure it has a visible alarm. Place a phone number outside of where that pump station is, because you may not always be around, but somebody walking by the system might hear that alarm and be able to call you to let you know that something's going on. R18-9A313 for general permits and O&M. In addition to operation requirements in the general permits for septic tanks, there are permits to ensure that the following tasks are also performed. I'm not going to go through all of these. Just make sure that residuals are pumped, clean backwash, any effluent filters, inspect and clean effluent baffles. That screen that I was showing you earlier on the septic tank, I failed to mention that some systems are historic systems and were installed before those septic tank screens were put in. If you do not have one, it's a good recommendation to have one installed to protect your leach field, but make sure you're checking them, once a year. Flush lateral lines, return flush water to pre-treatment headworks, inspect and remove and replace if necessary, and dispose of filter media. Not sure how I'm doing on time. Septage management, accept dumping that the system can handle. So you don't want to accept too much septage. And ADEQ is working on a substantive policy for this. Maricopa County is requiring applicants to use sewage vaults for discharging RV holding tank waste. Chapter 9 does not directly address disposal of RV holding tank waste. However, RV holding tank waste is characterized as a really high strength waste. The black water from an RV can be 10 times what normal strength of regular wastewater is. So we are working on a substantive policy where it might mirror something that Maricopa has in the future. RVs at a park with access to full hookups. If an RV is at a full hookup and is dumping their sewer, typically a system can bounce back from that high strength because it's not occurring often. Ensure backflow prevention of public water hose. I know this is a wastewater presentation, but when we head out to a system, one of the things that we see often is a garden hose sitting right next to a dump station, and there's no backflow prevention assembly to prevent anything from backwashing into the drinking water system that can contaminate your drinking water system. So a wastewater inspector, even though they're a wastewater inspector, might still see that and cite a facility for not having a testable backflow prevention assembly next to an RV dump site. Ensure that there's freeze protection on that garden hose, and then you also might want to make some signage, to let users know to not let that garden hose touch the wastewater. Dump stations could contain pre-treatment. This is a great way to protect your system. Having a separate tank that a holding tank that can be pumped out and sent to a larger publicly owned treatment works. Having aeration. We was talking about the formaldehydes and how they can affect systems earlier. If there's aeration in a tank, it can help break down those biocides inside from those formaldehydes over the course of 1 to 2 hours. So it's good to have aeration, and then of course screening to minimize the amount of inorganic matter that goes to your system. We haven't talked about it, but flushable wipes is a big one with that. That systems find really affect their systems and put a lot of solids in there. Treating wastewater is not free. We go to some systems that they really don't have, they really don't charge your users. Create a separate budget. Consider a savings account for large capital expenses. Tanks aren't going to last forever. Pumps aren't going to last forever. Blowers aren't going to last forever. You want to have kind of a set aside. So, when the life cycle for that septic tank or other equipment is due, you have means to pay for it. Septic tanks typically have a life of 20 years. Some can last up to 30, but eventually they'll need to be replaced. Connection fees are typically stored for future expansion. When a system charges connection fees, those fees should go directly into account so that when the facility is ready to expand in the future, they have that capital for it, and it can be used for end-of-life large capital as well. Flow-based fees help promote water conservation. If you have meters on each small system, it's good to have flow-based fees so that people try to use less water. And then fixed fees help support day-to-day operations. Sometimes they're charged. Sometimes we have some facilities that, even though they have people that own homes that only come in for 3 or 4 months a year, they still charge them the fixed fees because they still have to have their operators and support staff and O&M of their system, even though the person's on vacation somewhere. Again, with many systems, this is all these fees are governed by the Arizona Corporation Commission, so you definitely have to talk to them before charging the fees. If you want some assistance with that, the Environmental Finance Center Network worked with WIFA to evaluate all the fees in Arizona, and you can find this dashboard online, and you can look at your system, and you can look at similar systems to see what they're charging in order to mirror rates and try to keep your system going. That's all I have. I hope it was informational. If you have any questions, my contact information, I'm always open to calls. You're welcome to call me, or Karthik Korasamy can also answer your questions.